Hi there, it's Stuart once again, and I just thought to share a bit about longevity, health, and stress. Now, a lot of people would have heard about the effects of DNA and that DNA actually affect your being. A lot of people tend to look at it as the default problem when it comes to anything that you can't explain. Oh, it's a genetic problem. But truth be told, as you begin to age, you'll start to realize certain interesting patterns. For example, do you notice political office holders who start taking on office and their hair is black, and then later on their hair is white, like Barack Obama? What's really going on there? And a lot of the time you might attribute that to just pure stress, isn't it? That within 4 or 5 years holding that office, that one would age so rapidly. But the research does bear out, and genetically what's actually happening is your chromosomes are replicating, right? So every time it replicates, it strips off a little bit of the end known as a telomere, and these are, as what Elizabeth Blackburn says, are like the plastic caps at the end of your shoelaces, where it protects the chromosomes from actually unraveling. And every time a chromosome is being replicated, it actually loses a little bit of these telomeres. Now, while this is the general approach, what has been found is that a huge amount of stress can actually cause a rapid removal of this. And there's some research to indicate how caregivers who are undergoing a huge amount of stress, the more the length of time that they are giving care, the more likely they have a shorter telomere length. Now, what this means is that you're living literally at the end of a string. That end of that string, when shortened, basically means the end of life. You're no longer going to be able to reproduce your DNA. But what has been found by Elizabeth Blackburn is that you can actually replicate and increase the length of your telomeres for people who are in an intermittent fasted state. In other words, their body is being protected. There is a protective mechanism that enables not just muscle growth, but higher muscle quality, and the muscle fibers actually become stronger. What's also interesting is that, contrary to popular belief, intermittent fasting actually promotes something known as autophagy, which is the stripping away of old cells that actually ought to die. The so-called weaker cells are never recycled, and as a result, they mutate. Could it be that the signs of genetics and DNA are actually pointing the way to our immortality? In other words, could it not be that because you're living longer but you're eating, a terrible diet, you're starting to cause your entire body to fill up with cells that should die, that don't die, and eventually mutate? That's one. The second thing has got to do with stress. It's interesting that people who are under chronic stress actually encounter a shortening of the telomeres. But what if they had control, mental, emotional, psychological control over their stress? What would happen? And what's fascinating is that those who are able to treat the stress as some kind of a challenge, in other words, they were able to reframe inside their mind a way of thinking that was different than other people, what shows up is that their telomere length is significantly longer than those who treat stress as a problem, that treat stress as a life debilitating issue. So do we have conclusive proof? Well, Professor Elia Crum of Stanford University has been studying a huge amount of all these stress patterns. In a classic study, they primed workers with messages: stress is bad for you, if someone is more calm and not stressed, they will be able to survive longer, and so on and so forth, compared with a control group where they were inundated with, stress is a choice, you can actually deal with greater challenges if you stretch yourself beyond your limits, and so on. So there were two contrasting statements that were introduced cognitively into people through these so-called affirmations of beliefs. And what came out of that study is that those who were more positively primed for that stress, they ended up becoming far more resilient, and they converted that stress into sort of like a fuel. Triangulating that with the studies of the growth mindset by Carol Dweck, we all know that the growth mindset is fascinating, right? We're talking about the ability for you to move away from being fixed and thinking that you cannot go beyond a certain limit, into thinking that you've got a growth mindset, into thinking that you can learn, you can advance yourself, you can break through barriers by simply learning and observing what happens when you take some action, by putting in some forms of reflection, and utilizing that reflection to observe the growth patterns that have happened as a result of this effort that you've taken, so that you embrace the idea of it's okay to make mistakes as long as I'm moving forward with it. Interestingly enough, those who don't believe that mistakes are useful for them are likely to end up with a higher range of stress. So the cortisol that's building up creates aches and pains and so on. Whereas in many cases, if you look at cortisol as a mechanism, it is the central mechanism that gets you to wake up in the first place, right? So just think about that for a little while. The growth mindset, Eliacrum studies on stress, the Blackburn studies on DNA and telomerase, what does that all show? Well, more importantly, in neuro-linguistic programming, we talk about the internal dialogue that we have inside our head that enhances submodalities. From the Eliacrum study, we can literally trick our mind to believing certain things. If we can believe that stress is debilitating and kill ourselves, then if we consistently hold a message that stress is a good thing for us, that we are going to pull through because we're experiencing a rapid period of growth, isn't that hypnotizing ourselves? And as a result of that, don't we produce the right kinds of neurochemicals that can move us forward? Well, not so fast. While we can do that psychologically, the missing piece is in the nutrition. After all, what are the building blocks of those neurochemicals? They're the things that go into our body, right? As we're consuming it, these things are now made more bioavailable. Unfortunately, a lot of people are eating a lot of stuff that doesn't help them with their nutrition. Just take a look at people who consider a balanced diet. Now, if you are attempting to go for a balanced diet, it means that you eat whatever you want, just not too much. That's what the layman representation of a balanced diet actually is. But that's not the case. Most people are consuming way too much carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates, causing two things. Number one, an insulin spike. We all know from research that insulin spike is causing the type 2 diabetes that we see so prevalent in the world today. So it's very well known that insulin is there in order to open up the cells so that glucose can go into the cells. But if you've got insulin and you've got too much insulin, your body becomes resistant to it, and therefore, even though there's a lot of insulin, it's not making that message go through to the cells to, hey, hello, open up, let the glucose go in. And as a result, you seem to have an overflooding of glucose within your system, and that's what causes diabetes. Now, when that happens, you realize that people who get pre-diabetes, hypoglycemia, so to speak, they create a vicious cycle by trying to consume more. And that's one of the reasons why if you ate a protein-heavy meal, your level of satiety actually lasts longer. You don't feel like you want to eat much. Instead, if you're eating a carb-heavy meal, you start to feel hungry quite quickly. Diabetes type 2 is associated with the killing of blood capillaries, which eventually cause gangrene in the body, right? So that's why a lot of people who suffer from diabetes need to go for amputations and so on. But guess what? Your brain also has these capillaries, leads to Alzheimer's disease. If that's not already scary for you, there's something known as the inflammation effect. When you have a lot of grain-based food, that's refined carbohydrates, what happens is that the whole grain is stripped off, turned into a powder form, creating the ability to spike insulin very quickly. Conversely, if you're taking the grain with the same amount of carbs, the level of insulin doesn't spike so quickly. It actually goes more gradually because of the fibers that are binding it together. So what is interesting about that is when you are consuming whole grains, it's far better than consuming refined grains. If you follow the rabbit hole down this track, you'll be able to see that nutrition actually factors very, very heavily because these are the building blocks that our DNA requires in order to reproduce itself. Now, when you take a look at all this research, nutrition, stress response, cognitive input in terms of creating internal beliefs, then one of the most crucial things that we have to ask ourselves is then, when we want to improve ourselves, whether it's in our career, in our relationships or anything like that, what are we focusing on? The surprising thing is we tend to focus on the outcome, the external. And unfortunately, that's the outside-in approach. If only I could build good relationships with other people, I will be able to create the dream life that I have. If only I could get that promotion, I would have the dream life that I've always wanted. However, has it occurred to you that you can get all of that, but you're basically destroying yourself on the inside? What if I told you that the new way of thinking is, let's clean up that internal mess first. Let's get ourselves more physically productive. Let's get ourselves more effective in generating energy for life overall, so that we're eating the right things, our body is clean, so that when I want something out there, it becomes so much easier. What if that were a correlation? The old way of doing things is drive, willpower, motivation. Unfortunately, the truth is that drive, motivation and willpower are only going to last you this much if you're constantly wearing your body down. If you don't know how to recharge and replenish your energy, it doesn't matter how well you manage your projects in your career, all of this is going to go to waste because you're going to end up getting sick more regularly. And for people whom I know who take care of their nutrition, participate in intermittent fasting rituals of anything between 2 to 7 days, sometimes even longer, they actually experience a rebound in health that makes them feel even more energized, even more empowered to be able to move to the next level. You have to recognize that this is not an easy thing. What you want to do is to create the right kinds of habits and track these. But there's so much information, a lot of it is contradictory. How do you actually know where to go? See, the old way is to learn everything before you actually get started. The new way is to learn as you go along. That's one of the reasons why you want somebody who's experienced this, has a certain level of enlightenment, and then use that as a coaching basis in order to get to where you want to go. Many of my clients have actually experienced a huge amount of transformation due to the fact that they have implemented a tracking mechanism in order to see the shift from one means to another. Their nutrition improves, the way of thinking, their functioning improves, the way they nourish their brain improves, the way they are getting into elevated and positive states of emotion actually improves, and they're able to do this very elegantly so that they can take good things from their body, mind and spirit and transfer that to their workplace. Life becomes easier, conflicts drop down, they become healthier, they actually physically look younger, and over a course of time they come to realize how important it is to monitor that triangle of habit: the physical, emotional, and psychological. What I do is I help people to work on these in order to elevate their energy, their sense of character and identity in pursuit of whatever is meaningful for them out there in the world. And this is a very powerful thing, because if you're in a transition, you're going to experience heightened levels of stress. If you're experiencing heightened levels of stress that you don't know have hit you, you're going to end up feeling limited in some way. What if you could convert that into a means of deriving learning for yourself? How could you maintain gratitude in, simple meditative practices or breathing practices that allow the stress to go through you but not get to you? If you are interested in creating a holistic life transformation for yourself, and to not just to be able to live longer, but to be able to live through the challenges that you might be experiencing, whether it's a temporary transition, don't sweep all of those emotions under the carpet. Use them for your most powerful growth period at this point of time. The old way is to try and do it on your own and then to experience some epiphany through time, hopefully emerging because of the experiences that you're going through individually. I know that to be a very slow and painful process. In order for you to get there faster, you like guidance, you like some kind of a progression so that you are able to learn on the go without necessarily wasting 5, 10, 15 years learning everything about genetics, nutrition, neuro-linguistic programming, psychology, grit, all of that stuff all combined. And more importantly, you want to be able to find somebody who's already produced results in these areas. So I'd like you to go down to the description below, click on that link, fill up a form so that I will be able to share with you some ideas that could get you to become the best version of yourself ever. So go ahead, click on that link, let me know that you're serious about having this conversation, and we'll actually arrange for a meeting. If you find that this video was intriguing and useful for you, what I'd like you to do is to share it with your friends on social media, click on the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and I'll see you in my next video.